That's the sound of a man working on... Do it, Grant! That's the first time we've ever blended a smoothie on this channel. It's the first time you've seen a fruit smoothie blended on à-bas-le-ciel Broadcasting Corporation. That's Melissa. I'm sure you've never seen on the channel before. So Melissa, you could join in this video or not, but I was going to respond to these two questions. And part of what I do on the internet is giving reasonable answers to unreasonable questions. So like this one, you can see I'm going to answer them. I answer them both in a reasonable way. But there's this thing where the overall tone of discourse on the internet is really influenced by trolling, with people trying to say provocative things, and it's also influenced by anonymity and secrecy, where there's this assumption that I don't want to admit things about my life, or I'm not willing to talk about things about my life that I really am willing to talk about. You know what I mean? So one of these questions is about basically why don't I have a PhD? And one of them is about why don't I have a circle of friends, still today, that I used to have in high school and university. And they're both stated in this really kind of needlessly insulting and provocative way. I think because people feel that's the way the internet works. And I think they expect me to be hostile and defensive, and also kind of secretive in defending my anonymity. So to give an example, so these two questions, Melissa's seeing them on screen, you guys aren't. But do you think a natural vegan would ever answer a question like that? I don't think so. You know what I mean? Now, a natural vegan, a lot of these people, they to some extent they talk about their personal lives, like someone like a natural vegan, but to some extent there's also this weird kind of barrier. They don't keep it all the way real. They're not going to talk about exactly this kind of stuff. Yeah. But I'm totally willing to. I'm totally down. To me, these are normal topics of conversation that you discuss in a cafe. And if you ask me on the internet in the same way you'd ask someone in a cafe, I'm completely cool with talking about it. And I always feel what's the point of being on the internet if you're going to be evasive or dishonest about exactly this kind of stuff? So one of the questions, I'm just going to reword it to make it less offensive, but I got one question in effect saying, why doesn't Eisel already have a PhD? Now, if depending on who I'm talking to one of my university professors, I can give a longer answer getting into exactly what decisions I had made. But the written answer I gave on the internet was, quote, I have a 4-year-old daughter. I made sacrifices so that I could have a 4-year-old daughter. So, sacrifices around the time of the birth of my daughter. Right. I've never heard anyone at any level claim that I'd have difficulty getting into or completing a PhD. Have you seen my articles? Quite the contrary. I have many regrets in my life. Having a child is not one of them. The kid is worth more to me than a PhD. Right? So yes, it's why doesn't Eisel have a PhD? Well, for one thing, at that time in my life when I was making the decision, I made the decision to make some huge sacrifices, including moving to France. I didn't want to live in France. I didn't want to learn the French language. But I moved to France and started learning French so that I could have a kid, so that I could have my daughter, who's now, so that's now 4 years ago. My daughter's now 4 years old. We're going to visit her. But I mean, this also relates to something you and I have been talking about off camera a bit. The way planning for the future and making these decisions relates to the fact that in a lot of ways I'd already done everything I wanted to do in my life. So I wouldn't be in a position where I felt regret, I never got to see the Mekong River. Oh, I never got to do humanitarian work. Oh, I never got to study Cree or Ojibwe or Laotian or Pali. In so many ways at that stage of my life, 4 years ago, even 6 years ago, it really seemed like I'd already done everything in my life I ever wanted to do. And I mean, as you know, oddly, that was true of my father at some point. When my father died, people said to me, console, naturally. People said, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry. And I just say back, look, my father did everything he wanted to do. And he ran out of things to do, and he decided to go see rhinoceroses in Africa. I remember asking him, why did you go to Africa to see what? You never were interested in this. You know what I mean? My father had been everywhere on planet Earth except Antarctica. He'd done everything and so on. Well, I felt that way because I didn't have any interest in seeing rhinoceroses. But in terms of things I really wanted to do with my life, I'd already done them. That's one part of it. And another part of it, really briefly, is I definitely didn't feel I was missing out on anything in any of those PhD programs. I was not missing out on an educational opportunity. Mm-hmm. So, that's it's really different. If you work in a field where you really feel you're going to learn something, you're going to learn something that's valuable to you, that's going to be meaningful for the rest of your life of being in a PhD program, which is true for many people, at least at the start. At least they've got the delusion. That's one thing. But for me, it's you and I were looking at the requirements for one of the programs, and it required me to write a 120-page essay. And I was just laughing. I was like, look, man, I can do that in 2 weeks. Like, I'm very, very good at researching and writing papers. And the professors I've worked with at every stage of my life have known that about me. Mm-hmm. To some extent, they don't even realize how little time I'm putting into those papers, just how rapidly I'm doing it. But I have a long career of doing original research and writing it up, so nothing there is intimidating to me. And sure, there have been various options at different stages of my life for me to do PhD work. And now we're going back to Canada again, and I think we're going to ask those questions again and again. Sure. But, real life, we all make sacrifices. I might make the same choice again. So let's say 4 years from now, Melissa wants to get pregnant and have a baby. Mm-hmm. I may make the same decision again, and it'll probably be for the same factors. So be like, well, I would value having a child more than having a PhD. PhD is never going to earn me any money, which was true in the past, too. If you're talking about getting a PhD in Buddhist philosophy, talking about a PhD in Cree and Ojibwe linguistics, Cree language education or something like this, that's never going to make you any money and so on. You're really doing it. And in most of these programs, maybe I'll find an exception, most of these programs, I look at them and it's like, well, these people in this program, they don't really have anything to teach me. They're really just giving me an institutional setting where I can research and write a paper. So 4 years from now, I might again decide not to get a PhD with all the same considerations. Okay, so I got another question here. This one again, it's not even a thinly veiled insult, so I'm going to reword it to be less insulting. But he's asking me, he says, you have said in the past, so I have said in the past that I don't today have a group of lifelong friends from high school, college, or from my work life. And he asks, are you just a terrible person? Of course I'm a terrible person. I keep telling you, I keep reminding my audience I'm a terrible person. Don't say it as an accusation. I completely own being a terrible person. I'm not in any denial about that. But this kind of insult I find stupid, and nevertheless I'm giving a serious answer to a kind of stupid question here. I said in reply, no, I moved to Cambodia. I moved to Laos. I moved to Taiwan. I moved to France. I moved back from France to Taiwan, etc. And this list is omitting many other places that were there along the way. Yunnan, Sri Lanka, Saskatchewan. It's just geography. I had plenty of friends anywhere and everywhere that I lived for a significant period of time. But I kept moving, rarely staying in the same place for 2 years during my whole adult life. Let's digress here. Funny example of this. So, I only ever had one Asian girlfriend. My one Asian girlfriend ever. That was when I was living in Laos, and I remember she reproached me. She said, oh, you don't have any friends here. And I remember I asked her, I said, well, I've been living here in Laos for less time than you have. She's been living there her whole life. And I started counting off all the friends I had in Laos. So at that point, I'd probably been living in Laos for a year and a half or something. And I was able to count off people I had really personal relationships with, including David, including some people you know about, yeah, right? But people who were kind of, deep, lifelong friend type of people. And I said, how many friends do you have? Because I knew, it's like same with you, like I know how many friends you have, basically, you know what I mean? And she basically had her sister, she had one sister she was close with, and she had like one friend. That was it. Right. And I don't even, think, but a lot of people like that, a lot of people, don't have a whole lot of friends, you know what I mean? And I said, but it was just there. I was like, well, I've only been here for a short time, and I got a lot of good friends. But anyway, sure, it's a different story in different places. It's harder to make meaningful friendships in Hong Kong, big city, everybody's busy, than it is to make friends in Laos. But I really can't complain that way. But sure, it was sad for me when I packed up and left Laos, which was unexpected. I got death threats from the government. I got exiled from the country with death threats, and I left with nothing but my backpack and blah, blah, blah. This whole dramatic situation. When I left Laos, I lost those friends. And sure, I would prefer if those people had stayed in touch with me, but that's not what happened. So if you keep moving, you keep losing friends every time you move. That is my experience in life. And of course, it wouldn't be the same if you were just moving from Detroit to Philadelphia. Yeah. We're talking about leaving Laos and moving to England and then moving from England to Cambodia. These are big dislocations. And, also my career, my line of work changing with each of those relocations and dislocations. All right. So I then let the guy know, look, this is an offensive, his question was really stated in an offensive and insulting way. And I said, look, if you watch my channel, you know my reasons for being on the internet. I'm here fundamentally to make connections with other vegans who can cooperate with me in the future of the vegan movement. So these kinds of games, what you're playing here, I don't play. And that's how I feel about it. I think in a lot of ways, I'm still out here doing real talk. I've had so many negative experiences on the internet. I'm not shell-shocked. I'm not self-pitying. But sure, I've suffered the slings and arrows of defamation from Doreen Ryder and all this crap. But fundamentally, somebody's got to keep it real. And the rewards for my keeping it real include, by the way, that I met my wonderful girlfriend, Melissa. For real, when I first met Melissa, you really knew who I was. And you knew from my YouTube videos, and you knew from reading my essays, and you knew from... it's not like there's an illusion and then you get behind the illusion and find out who I really am. Nope, this is who I really am. And I think it's people like me, we risk the most on the internet, but we also by far get the best rewards on the internet. And if you're using YouTube, if you're using the internet itself, I encourage you to keep it real. And even if you get questions that are really just insults, even if you get this kind of harassment, do your best to offer serious answers to silly questions and try to improve the tone and caliber of our discourse here in the digital vegan demimonde. I'm out.